Data protection and privacy teams are under more pressure than ever with new laws, AI oversight, data breaches, and the constant expectation to do more with fewer resources.
That's why TrustArc built a modern privacy and data protection management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. It unifies your tools, automates the work that slows you down, and surfaces what matters most right when you need it.
From guided quick actions to our intelligent assistant, Ask Arc, you get credible, contextual answers backed by expert research, not generic AI guesses.
Finally, privacy that works the way privacy pros work.
Learn how TrustArc helps teams move faster with confidence at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.
You're listening to Serious Privacy by TrustArc. Please welcome our hosts, Paul Breitbarth and Kay Royal.
Running a privacy program is one thing, but what does it take to actually understand what is happening in your organization? Many privacy professionals approach their compliance programs from a legal angle, looking at what the laws say that should and cannot be done. But do they also look beyond the legal approach, diving deep into the technical requirements, for example, to find out how data actually flows around the company, and around the world for that matter? Our guest today is doing right that. Ray Everett is founding member and chief privacy intelligence officer at Data Secrets, a company that develops solutions focused on identifying risk wherever applications are accessing your data, in the public cloud, in SaaS applications, and on-premise. He has a long history working as a privacy professional, including at TrustArc, and was appointed as the first Internet-era Chief Privacy Officer in 1999. Now, how about that? My name is Paul Breitbarth.
And I'm Kay Royal, and welcome to Serious Privacy. Ray, thank you so much for joining us today. You know, I've been dying to have you on the show. I think we should probably schedule just 3 episodes with you, just to get us started.
Happy to be here. I mean, it'll take 3 episodes for you and I to get around to talking about something meaningful.
Right. Paul is in trouble here. He has no idea whatsoever.
I'm looking forward to the edit already.
Well, and as you know, and I'll share this because our listeners love to hear the behind the story things, or so I think they do. As you came on today, we're like, all right, Ray, we can talk about anything with you. What did we plan out? And Paul's like, there's an outline with questions and things. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that. So, all right, ready for the unexpected question? Sure. What do you want to buy?
Oh, what do I want to buy? What don't I want to buy? So, yeah, I at this moment, I just moved into a new home and I would like to buy a reliable electrician. But the actual answer is probably I would like to buy a long vacation. I think we could all use a long vacation, but in particular, I would buy all of the accoutrement with that too. So, you know, a lot of wine, a lot of food, a lot of sunscreen. And I don't know if that's a suitable answer.
Maybe some books.
Yeah, so books, you know, I listen to some podcasts and I'm off to the races.
Yeah, we just remodeled our kitchen and we're at the very last stages, literally the very last stages of hooking up the water in the sink with a garbage disposal and a dishwasher. I could use a good electrician and a good plumber. But okay, Paul, what would you like to buy?
I guess I'm not allowed to mention anything food or cooking related anymore on this program. So
no one's complained.
Let me say a new house. That's on my wish list.
There we go. Anywhere in particular or like a townhome? And I can't see you going out in the country.
No, I would stay in The Hague, and there is a specific project that I'm looking at, but it's not for sale yet, so I have to wait.
Nice.
Okay. I was going to say, who do I need to kill or all for whatever, make it happen?
Probably the building company or the architect, but...
Okay. And you're probably going with bribing rather than... Okay, yeah. I like that. We could try that. With me, I'm going to stick with the housing theme here. As I just said, we're remodeling the house. My pool is being finished outside. It's already been over 100 degrees in Arizona. It actually holds water. We had the kids over for Mother's Day, actually used the pool.
So you want to buy a floating flamingo?
Yeah, exactly. Unicorn, dude. Unicorn. Yeah.
Well, let us take a moment to reflect that Kay doesn't have a working kitchen sink, but her pool is ready. So,
so at least there is a source of water if you need it.
I I can throw the dishes in the pool and have a blast. There we go. I love it. Okay. All right. Okay. For anyone who did not know, Ray and I used to work together at TrustArc, and absolutely, Ray, you were the go-to resource. How many emails or voicemails or text messages did you get from me with looking for insight on what to do for this client, or how do we solve this problem, or, oh, wait, this sounds great. How do we do that? Just the amount of knowledge and experience. You have probably forgotten more than Paul and I together will ever learn.
Well, thank you. It's been a long ride, and I indeed, I know where a lot of the bodies are buried, and I have a bad back from all of the digging. So,
and that would be the equivalent of me following you around carrying a shovel. Exactly. So, okay, so let's dive into some real privacy questions. Paul is always the one that gets to start us off. Paul, what question?
I want to go back further into history because when reading Ray's bio, I see he is the first Internet-era Chief Privacy Officer. How do you become that, and how do you determine that you were the first?
Yeah. Well, it was interesting. Back in the late 90s, I was working at a law firm and was involved very heavily in the anti-spam and sort of general kind of email marketing and early days of privacy regulation, compliance questions. Actually, even before then, when I was in law school, the U.S. Federal Trade Commission had begun looking at internet privacy issues. And even as a law student, I had submitted a couple of answers to some questions that they were posing for a public workshop that they were doing on internet privacy and email spam and malware and all sorts of interesting topics. And they invited me to actually speak on a panel. And I began sort of realizing that there was an opportunity in the space. And when I began practicing law, got wound up in the Rolodex of a bunch of different news reporters and the like, and eventually came to the eye of some folks who were developing a very early online advertising, behavioral targeting technology company out in Silicon Valley. And they were building a company, but very cognizant of the fact that privacy was going to be a huge factor in the development of real, robust online targeting and behavioral advertising. And they wanted someone as a part of the early team to focus on making privacy a core value. And I began talking with the founders of the company and the CEO, and he actually had come up with the idea of a chief privacy officer as a title and as a role that reported directly to the CEO that made privacy front and center in the organization. And I did what internet research I could do in the late 1990s to look for that title. And while there were some folks called privacy officers in the government, in the United States government, they were mostly involved with handling the privacy aspects of Freedom of Information Act requests.
I was going to say,
and so when we created the role and called it a chief privacy officer, it was the first one that I'd ever found in the space. I learned later that there was someone at a technology company, actually a large database marketing company, that had a privacy officer title. And so, but that had been a number of years earlier. And so I further refined my title to the first internet era chief privacy officer. But what was interesting was that as I started to talk to people about the role and evangelize the importance of taking privacy seriously as both a risk management topic as well as a general just sort of corporate ethics concept, I began to realize that there was a lot of traction in the market for the concept. And indeed, within a year or so, there were a bunch more folks who were being appointed as privacy officers. I like to tell the story of a fellow that I met very early on in my time in Silicon Valley. He was working on some of the same issues for another advertising-related entity. And I told him about this idea of the chief privacy officer. And he said, oh, let me go back to my company and talk to the CEO and see if we can create a similar role at our company. And a couple of weeks later, he called me up and he said, hey, I'm now our chief privacy officer. And I said, great, there's two of us. We can start an association. and I was only half facetious. And in fact, within about 6 or 8 months, we had a whole group of us meeting at a restaurant in Washington, D.C., plotting the founding of what eventually became the International Association of Privacy Professionals.
Now, what was it called in the beginning?
In the original, it was the Privacy Officers Association, and very creative. And we had a core group, and it was interesting because it was around the time that HIPAA was really sort of taking effect, and a lot of organizations were dealing with it. And so we literally grafted an extra day onto a HIPAA conference to be just more generally focused on privacy issues. And then there were so many people that signed up for that as like a separate track that the next year we developed a separate conference for it.
And you do know that I'm racking my brain trying to recall whether or not I was at that extra HIPAA track. But I don't think so, because I was a nurse when HIPAA went live.
Yeah. Well, and it was actually that one of the sponsors of that conference was nurses training organization that was trying to inculcate HIPAA preparedness in nurses and support. Yeah.
Ray, I might very well have been at that meeting.
It's possible. It's possible. There was events all over the country, and we just grafted the privacy track onto one of them. So. Funny.
I wonder, was it associated with the Healthcare Compliance Association?
No. Well, no.
Or American Nurses Association.
Yes. Yeah, they were a sponsor. Yeah.
I'm not going to go look that up. All right. Who were some of the names of the first people? Jim
Koenig was very early. And so, the rest of the story was the individual that I talked to about this job. He went on to be the very first chief privacy officer for a little startup called Facebook. And that was Chris Kelly. And Chris went on, he and I both rose to great heights. He's now a co-owner of the Sacramento Kings basketball team, and I'm on Serious Privacy Podcast. So I think it's pretty much equivalent.
That's right. You couldn't ask for anything more.
So how do your challenges back in the day compare to what you were seeing in the field today?
It's funny. There are so many similarities to the early days of privacy, because right now we're seeing so many organizations focus on privacy really, in some cases for the first time, or seeing privacy at a level that is almost a sort of a first impression for many organizations. So a lot of the same challenges that we saw in the early 2000s of organizations who are like, well, we'll deal with the privacy issues when they arise, or we'll wait till there's a problem and then we'll solve it, because what you're talking about is in some cases, a systemic change to the organization or a fundamental sort of rethinking of certain products. And they don't want to go through that process unless they're forced to. And it's very much...
It's like bolt-on safety features for automobiles.
Exactly.
Used to be until the Pinto.
And the CEO at TrustArc, Chris Babel, frequently analogizes the growth and evolution of privacy to the security space about 15, 20 years ago. Yeah. And it is a very apt comparison, because the early days of security were, we'll wait till there's a problem, then we'll fix it. We'll lock the doors after. And that has created an environment where people stumble into huge issues that can be sort of catastrophic for their organization. And now in 2021, we're still having fundamental conversations about, are you taking this seriously enough? Are you implementing the technologies and the tools you need to manage these risks? So, I've been having these conversations for 2 decades now and longer, and, I've gotten good at it.
I was just thinking that everybody says we're going through growing pains as a privacy field or as a field. But I'm thinking it's more than growing pains. It's more like a growth spurt.
Well, there's definitely an explosion right now of interest and because people who hadn't cared about the risk are now suddenly caring about it in new ways. For example, before I came to my current company, Data Secrets, I was chief privacy officer for a financial technology company called Blackhawk Network. And at Blackhawk Network, the company had actually been taken private by a private equity firm just a couple of years before I came aboard. And the PE firm was very concerned about its exposure across its portfolio to privacy issues. And every company that they brought into their portfolio, they were doing detailed due diligence on the privacy sort of state in those companies. And that was very new for them as an organization. But in the post-GDPR era, they were concerned that, if you've got a fine of, 4% of your global run, is that the parent company? Is that the company that, that ultimately owns you? Because when you're a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm with 15 or 20 major companies in your portfolio, one problem somewhere, if that interpretation goes wrong, could be extraordinarily costly.
Oh, yeah, especially post-Marriott. I mean, they didn't do the wrong thing, kind of, sort of.
And all of these folks who are actually now paying attention to privacy risk and compliance risk more broadly are also now starting to focus on the fact that there are tools in the market that can address some of these issues. At Data Secrets, we're building tools for focusing on how data moves through distributed data environments, particularly looking at APIs, because that's the channel by which data literally moves between systems and platforms and the like. And
okay, tell us a bit more about APIs. I mean, everybody always explains it to me like it is a plugin that you use, like you have a plug on a household appliance, but in practice, it never works that way.
Yeah, they all claim they have open APIs. This is easy.
So I liken an API to not so much a plug as the question of whether or not your device has multiple ports on it for connecting. So, for example, you've got a computer and you've got a monitor, and if you've got a very good, complicated computer, you might be able to connect that monitor with an HDMI cable or a DVI cable or even an old VGA cable. And the fact that there are different ports and you can use different cables that have different capabilities, to me, is a good analogy to the API, to the application programming interface, which is giving...
Oh, interesting. I never thought about it that way, but I like it.
So you might have a platform and you need to get the data out of it. And depending on your use case, a different way of getting that data out might be valuable. So, for example, when you have a system like a marketing platform like Marketo, and you're connecting your website to Marketo so that you've got some flow of information. Maybe there's cookies being set. Maybe there's information about retargeting that's being captured. You can have that through very simple means, just like a web call. You've got a cookie, it goes and pings the server and trades some little bit of information, and there's something in a log. But more complex and more robust connections through an API will allow more data to be moved in a more detailed and a more readily accessible and programmatically accessible way. But those APIs that connect up everything create risk. You can set up an API, you can have a port on the back of your machine and it's old and it's not used anymore, but somebody could come along and stick something in it and start pulling data out of your system. This is why in high security environments, you'll find them super gluing closed the USB ports on computers, because you can pop a thumb drive in there with some malware or something that will hijack a computer and create a risk, create a problem. And there are lots of organizations that have APIs sort of flapping in the wind that they haven't used in ages, they haven't disabled. And there's plenty of existing APIs that are connecting multiple different platforms and technologies. And you need a way to watch all of those. You need a way to determine if there's risk arising from them. And right now, there's kind of a gap in the market. People will do data inventories, so they may know that data is moving from, point A to point B, but they may not go that next level down to understand exactly what data is moving where and how. And if it's an API, you could have you may only think your name and email address are traversing there, but the API can access every field in the database. And if you structure the query through an API, you could have a much bigger risk than you might have realized. And to see and watch that is a very valuable thing. And that's what Data Secrets is building, the tools to do that.
How do you secure an API? Because if I follow your analogy from the various connectors on your computer, if I want to connect my phone to a USB port, I can put another USB connector on it to stop, for example, the data flow and only use the power function so that nobody can tap the phone while it's charging in an unknown USB port. Is there something similar you can do for an API?
So there's actually a number of solutions there. First of all, you can encrypt the transport so that it's harder to intercept the data flowing. So an API can be over a secure connection generally to prevent data risk in transit. But then there are capabilities around using sort of access controls to access the API. So you might need to present an encryption key in order to be able to both decipher the data within that feed and also to authenticate yourself to access. So you can secure the API in using encryption at sort of various points and in various ways. But the challenge then becomes, all right, you've got an authenticated connection between point A and point B, but are they pulling only the data that is relevant and necessary? Are they pulling data that they used to have a need for, but now don't any longer? Maybe there's an encryption key that never got deprecated or an access code that never got removed. And in fact, in a number of instances, we had clients when I was doing consulting work at TrustArc who ran into security problems where APIs were being accessed. Somebody had sort of cracked the capability to access that API. And to them, it was just, API is moving data. That's what it's supposed to do. But only later did they realize it was a hacker who had figured out how to structure queries and to send to that API that was now able to access personal data in a way that, was either inappropriate or exceeded what they should have been doing. And that created a whole series of problems and data breach issues just because nobody was watching to see what the API was doing and couldn't differentiate between a legitimate use and an illegitimate use.
How would you tell the difference? I mean, running through my brain is audit logs, monitoring, alerts. I mean, how would you monitor?
So there's, and that's exactly the question that we faced in building the tools at Data Secrets, which is you can have a more static set of data. You can have your logs, you can have your database schema just to understand what data is available in a platform. You have your spec for the API so you can understand what data can actually be pulled by that API. You can watch the queries being made in a log to see, who's calling what data. You can, catch IP addresses and the like in there. But then the question becomes, is that activity different or unique or new and problematic or new and acceptable? And that's where you have to do kind of a different layer of analysis. And that's why we're taking an approach involving use of artificial intelligence to detect changes as well as to detect the context of those changes. So we're turning laws like GDPR and CCPA into rule sets that an artificial intelligence sort of agent can utilize to watch data and say, all right, I've I've been told that moving this data from point A to point B is acceptable, but now there's a different set of data being moved, or now the end destination is no longer within Europe, it's now within the United States, and that changes the compliance requirements around it. Again, if you had only a care about the API, you're like, well, the data is moving with an API. There's an API, and it's and everyone is authenticated on the right side of it. But now it's moving to a new region. Now it's moving to a new vendor, and that will trigger compliance concerns, changes in risk. And as a result of that, today you would need to have someone look at that, really untangle all the spaghetti, figure out what the difference was, and then apply some sort of, risk management judgment to it. Right. But with some intelligent agents, with concepts like, machine learning and concepts like a knowledge graph that turns laws and regulations into essentially actionable code, you can now build solutions on a more technical level, on a more algorithmic level, to do the things that normally you would have to do in a very manual way. So for Data Secrets, we're kind of trying to fill in some of those gaps and push in to the next level.
Oh, I like
Would
that.
such an approach also work with SDKs for mobile apps, which are often criticized for developers using them but not knowing what's in them?
Well, yeah, that's an important piece of the puzzle there, because as you build a platform and you build APIs into your platform so that you can move data around, or you implement solutions that connect up with an API, you've got Slack, and you've got your SharePoint, and you've got your outside vendors for different things like business intelligence and ERP and the like. You're also building these things into other applications using SDKs. Your sort of development ops people are constantly coding and improving and changing the way APIs work. And so detecting those changes, you would hope that all of those activities go through a PIA process, a review by the privacy team, also potentially by the security team, and looking for other compliance issues. But they don't always, and minor tweaks can happen that don't rise up through a vetting and review process. But if you're watching the logs, if you're watching the queries, if you're having something that can ingest the spec and spot the differences, then you have a real chance of seeing those issues almost in real time as they arise.
Well, that's really cool. You said something earlier, and I don't want to chase down this bunny trail, but seriously, are companies still using USB drives?
You'd be surprised.
Am I just in a sheltered environment here?
No, I have seen organizations as recently as a couple of years ago who, when they needed to move large amounts of data, would get the biggest thumb drives they could find. Because they're like, well, we used to send a hard disk, but, that got to be heavy and expensive. And look, I can get, a 2 terabyte thumb drive for cheap, and I can buy them in bulk.
Wow. I guess maybe I'm hiding under a rock here because,
You may be, because there are good reasons to still use them. I know that when we still had conferences, those big get-togethers.
Yeah, the vendors always put their stuff on the USBs, but I never have ever plugged them in.
No, but on the other hand, we also used them ourselves because they would plug in all the monitors that you would have in the booth where you would want to show your videos. So you would put the videos on a thumb drive that you can then plug into the television to just automatically run all the videos that you wanted to show.
I guess that does make sense. So temporary information that you want to take and
low
display,
risk.
That I guess that does make sense. But wow. Okay. I guess with external hard drives, they're the same risk as USB drives are. They hold a whole lot more data. So they could be risky, probably not as easy to lose, but essentially...
Oh, yeah,
I
they
guess,
can get lost too.
well, I know
they get
can.
lost in the mail as well. And especially the ones with medical data always get lost and end up on the desk of the DPA.
Of course. But, I guess... Technically, I guess an external hard drive and a USB are almost the same thing, and they're getting closer in size. So, okay.
Yeah, well, it's funny. You look at a lot of these external hard drives, and if you break them down, they're literally a bunch of chips that could probably fit in a thumb drive. They're just in a bigger housing, mostly for, heat dissipation and cooling. But as they get bigger, of course, Kay, the real challenge is when you put more data on it, they get a lot heavier. So the shipping costs increase. All those bits start to weigh heavily. So
You're killing me, dude. You're killing me, dude.
So is this the level of technical expertise we may need to expect from the CPO, or does that go a bit deeper?
Well,
there's going to be people out there, because I was nodding along with you until it registered what you said, and then I'm like, really, dude? You were just going to keep going until you saw my face change, weren't you?
Exactly. No, it was. I was.
I was actually thinking they're putting more equipment in the external hard drives,
Well, I know. I bought my mom a new phone for Christmas a couple of years ago, and I told her, she said, well, now can I put all my music on here? And I said, well, just be careful, because the more music you put on there, the heavier the phone is going to get. And it took her about 30 seconds, and then she slapped me. So
she was used to you. But you also said something here about the SDKs. Explain to me how people might be able to use SDKs, or how should they approach SDKs in order to better protect data? Because I know that was one thing we wanted to talk about.
Yeah, so one of the issues there with SDKs is that you need to have a level of openness and a real understanding of what's happening within the SDK. So the documentation around SDKs is very important. The leveraging of any sort of external technologies, libraries, other components from other sources. You'd be surprised at how many companies will just sort of cobble together a bunch of stuff sourced from elsewhere, put their own kind of proprietary connectors and a little icing on the cake, and ship it out without always a full understanding of all of the pieces there. Because when you're building on top of a bunch of bricks that somebody else built, those bricks are each independently susceptible to challenge or to risk.
Right.
And just like any operating system, you have an issue of needing to update the components on that system, and you're only as strong as your last patch. So you have challenges, you have risks associated with leveraging all those components. So clarity as to what components an SDK is leveraging. This is going to require, engaging engineering expertise to really sort of tease out and, again, kind of untangle all the spaghetti is really essential.
Yeah, I'm thinking both about open source software as well as Internet of Things, and the complexities of all the bits and pieces that might go into an autonomous car, and who owns the data, because you don't know of all the bits and pieces that are cobbled together in that car to make it run.
There's one of the attack vectors for a lot of things has always been things like the DNS system. I was for many years a board member at the Network Time Foundation, the folks who sort of are the keepers of the Network Time Protocol, which is how computers keep time and how things stay in sync. Little things like the GPS system, and those components are ubiquitous, and a security issue in them can ripple across many different technologies, different platforms, just because they're one of those many building blocks that are inside a lot of these apps that get incorporated through SDKs, and all need to be sort of watched and kept in mind.
Oh, that's interesting, especially a lot of the startup companies that are coming out that are just faster and better than we've ever seen tech startup companies come out. Really need to make sure that they're paying attention to this information, not only leveraging new technologies in new ways, but making sure that you understand and you have the clarity. And if you want to be bought or you want your product to be bought, to make sure that you understand the data and the collection and the use and the connections and all the different little bits and pieces, which startup companies tend not to understand.
Well, that's the real challenge today. I think for both big companies and small, is to be prepared to answer those questions, the tough risk analyses that are being put to every vendor in the space, to every partner, and so you've got a real challenge of, do you have your ISO 27001 certification? Are you PCI DSS compliant? If you're dealing with credit cards or whatever.
And those are still the easy questions.
Yeah, but Ray, I don't handle credit cards. We have a vendor that does that. I don't need to be PCI
Exactly. And those challenges, those questions arise, and when you start picking them apart, you realize, oh, well, wait a minute. We've got a customer service team that, as a part of their standard practice, gets the credit card number information and pastes it into the ticket. So now you've got a ticketing system full of credit card numbers too.
And of course, they wrote it on a Post-it right there next to
no, that's where they keep their password.
Your computer for the exactly.
I was going to say that's for the password.
Okay, Paul's not going to let me keep running on here. So,
Paul? We need to have shorter shows. So we need to wrap up. Unfortunately,
50-minute shows were too long. Walk the dog or exercise.
Nice. Okay.
So is there one final tip you would like to give to CPOs based on your 22 years of experience of being a CPO or in like-minded roles? What is the one thing that people nowadays should really take into account that we haven't discussed yet?
I would say, generally lower alcohol wines allow you to enjoy more before you become too snockered. No,
that's a wonderful tip.
And while you're sipping a nice champagne, about a 13%, 12%, you should also get to know your technologists. You should build over wine or, whatever they need, whatever their beverages of choice. The building that relationship, particularly my trick was always getting to know the database administrator, because he or she,
the architect was mine.
Architects as well, because he or she always knows where the data really is, what that data is, and how to, and who's using it in an organization. Those technology relationships are the ones that you really need to cultivate. As an ancillary, the InfoSec folks are really important to build relationships with as well.
Privacy, InfoSec, and audit have to work hand in hand. They have to.
And it's all about communication.
It is. All right. Y'all two need to get to know each other well. You and Paul, y'all are the foodies and the whinies here.
Well, on that note, thank you for listening to another episode of Serious Privacy. If you like our series, please do tell your friends and colleagues about us. Rate and leave a review in your favorite podcast app if you can. And if you want to be a guest on the show, or if you have suggestions on who you want to hear from, please reach out to us via seriousprivacy@trustarc.com, via Twitter @podcastprivacy, or directly to Kay as Heart of Privacy and myself as your old Paul B. Thank you for listening, and until next time.
Bye, y'all.
That was Serious Privacy.
If you're a data protection or privacy professional, you already know the pressure. Non-stop regulatory change, AI oversight, internal demands, and the expectation to somehow stay ahead of it all. And the old patchwork of tools just isn't cutting it anymore.
No. That's why TrustArc created a modern privacy management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. The TrustArc platform brings your workflows, evidence, research, tasks, and applications all together in one unified and intelligent workspace, so you don't waste time digging, clicking, or context switching.
With Ask Arc, your privacy assistant, you can ask plain language questions about laws, jurisdictions, or even your own program data, and get credible, cited answers based on NIMBY research and more than 1,000 global laws. It's explainable, transparent, and purpose-built for data protection and privacy.
So if you need to add a vendor, create a cookie banner, or start an assessment, quick actions take formally complex tasks, turn them into bite-sized guided workflows to save you time.
It's a platform that thinks like you, works like you, and helps you move faster with confidence, whether you're a seasoned DPO or you're just getting started.
See how modern privacy gets done. Explore Arc at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.